Hey, hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Lee Demarbre, a filmmaker and old-school exhibitor who launched his career with a parody trailer for a martial arts picture called Harry Knuckles and made his first feature, Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter, in 2001. His subsequent films include The Dead Sleep Easy, Smash Cut, and the documentary Vampiro, Angel, Devil, Hero. And this month, his new film Enter the Drag Dragon is rolling across Canada. It's playing right now in Saskatoon through Thursday, June 15th at the Scotiabank Theatre, and opening in Toronto at Cineplex Yonge Dundas, June 23rd. It's very, very silly, but that's kind of the point. You know what's not silly? The Wild Bunch. Sam Peckinpah's 1969 hand grenade of a Western about the end of the gunslinger era, starring William Holden, Ernest Borgnine, Ben Johnson, and Warren Oates as a gang of aging outlaws, and Robert Ryan as the ex-amigo determined to bring them to justice once and for all. It's about comradeship, last stands, and a man's word being just about all he has. It's about swagger and blood and the way the world rolls right past you no matter who you are. It's about Sam Peckinpah being kind of awesome. It's about a lot of things. And I'll let Lee tell you. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I go on dog walks. I go on 3 dog walks a day. And they're about an hour long each. And one of them is with a 13-year-old boy and his father. And all he wants to do is when he grows up, be a filmmaker.
Okay.
And I keep talking about the Wild Bunch, and I tell him, I think pound for pound, it is the greatest film ever made. If you can appreciate what it takes to make a movie, if you can appreciate, everything that goes into setting up a frame, pulling focus, lighting, and most importantly with that film is putting the images together. I can shoot you and looking at William Holden and the way those images come together, the way he creates a montage, it's spectacular. I've watched that movie with people. I watched it twice with this one woman who works at the Mayfair Theater where I work, and she walked out both times. Not because she was just not bored, she just wasn't into it, and she'd go for a cigarette or go get some more popcorn or go for really long bathroom breaks. Because she's sitting there not thinking about the process of filmmaking. She just thinks it's another stupid cowboy movie. But if you can, I don't know. When I watch the movie, I just think about Sam Peckinpah being behind the camera, knowing how to shoot every shot and sequence every shot. It's almost like, it reminds me of Thor. Thor is a powerful superhero because he's got a hammer. And Sam Peckinpah wields a movie camera like Thor wields a hammer. He's got might behind the movie camera. Him and John Woo, I don't know Stanley Kubrick, Russ Meyer. When I'm watching their movies, I don't need an opening credit sequence to tell me who directed it. I don't need a closing credits to tell me who directed it. I can tell because their fingerprints are all over that movie. And in a way, I guess Wild Bunch is one of 3 films that he made where he had complete creative control, and it's his biggest film. So that's the reason why I picked that one. I mean, I often, when people ask me my favorite movie, I'll say The Wild Bunch, or I'll say Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, or I'll say, Eastern Condor, or Sammo Hung. It always comes down to action, because action cinema really does. I think Tarantino said it recently, tests every ability you have as a filmmaker to put a moving image on the screen. Like there's filmmakers like Michael Bay who don't care about the sequence of images. They can, his last one, Ambulance, had all these tremendous drone shots, but he doesn't care about way images are sequenced. He doesn't care about coverage. And to me, coverage is paramount when it comes to quality filmmaking. I always think about the quality of filmmaking. Some people, why did you like that movie? Because the quality of filming, look how well it was made and the construction of it all. Michael Bay is closer to a music video director than a storyteller, wherein Sam Peckinpah gets his incredible shots, his coverage, and his sequences of the shots. Even his lousy films, like I watched The Osmerman Weekend recently because there's a brand new Blu-ray that came out. And there's this one shot in the movie in a car chase. I'm like, how did he know to put the camera there? How did he know to cut the cover of the shot from that angle? It blew my mind. I watched the new episode of Mandalorian last night, season 3, episode 1, and there was one shot, and it made me think of Peckinpah. And I know Dave Filoni thinks about Peckinpah because the first episode of season 1 was a direct reference to Wild Bunch. So there's this one shot. I'm like, there it is again. Like, I loved it. I love stopping for a moment, maybe even pressing pause, going back to watch a shot, because I can't imagine how they got it or thought they get it. And Wild Bunch has that in spades. I don't know if that's a long-winded way of answering the question.
No. This show is about passion. It's absolutely, like if you can care enough about a movie to address it from every single aspect, that's what I want. And I have to say, like, I'm surprised no one has picked it before. Guy Madden brought Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia onto the show.
Wow.
4 years ago, maybe even 5.
Wow.
And Peckinpah has just, we were talking about this before we started recording, he's just sort of, he hasn't disappeared exactly, but his movies don't have the cachet that they used to, which I find really bizarre because Tarantino has been doing everything he can to bring them back, right? Like it's not that Warner Brothers is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, and I'm sure the Wild Bunch will turn up in some shape or form, but it's been weird to meet people who are much younger than we are and have them just completely unaware of who he was. Or if they do know him at all, it seems that they know Straw Dogs because of the controversy more than anything else, the way that it's been reevaluated in the rearview mirror. It's not even a controversy. It's just there was a remake a little while ago and that brought people around to talking about the original. But yeah, he's not as prominent as he should be given how much of an influence his films have had, and the Wild Bunch especially.
Yeah, it's amazing. He's only, what has he made, 9 films? He hasn't made a lot of feature films.
That sounds right.
When I watch his movies, and I'll go back and watch them all, I sometimes wish he made more. The Wild Bunch is, his impact, it's his visual, it's his style, I think, that has the impact. You're right. Look, compare him to John Ford. John Ford and him are both synonymous for working in the same genre. John Ford made 9 movies in 2 years, a few times in his career, where Sam Peckinpah worked so long and made so little, and did music videos. I was thinking about the Wild Bunch too, in relation to that, when I think of his visual style, I think of he stylized and made violence beautiful. And I'm not a fan of glorifying gunplay in movies. Okay. I'm always aware when a filmmaker is being irresponsible with a gun in a movie. I find it really, really jarring. Some people, actors, directors think guns are cool. They probably go to shooting range with their friends, and then there's filmmakers like John Woo and Sam Peckinpah who depict it in a different, responsibly. The guns always seem very sort of villain, horrific in a villain's hands, and maybe heroic in a hero's hand. But when I think about Sam Peckinpah, it's the way he stylized action and violence to make it look beautiful. And John Woo does the same thing. And Wild Bunch is his 3rd film. His first film is Deadly Companions. His second film is the beautiful Ride the High Country. Neither of those films have that stylized action that John Woo created, or seemingly created, until the Wild Bunch. And I was thinking about what it was about the Wild Bunch. Bonnie and Clyde came out the year before the Wild Bunch.
Yeah, well, it was when, I think he was shooting it when the first release happened.
Yeah.
And then the second was like the reevaluation the following spring.
And he saw the slow motion violence depicted at the end of that movie. And I think I don't know this, he grabbed that and made it beautiful. He took that and added to it. He created he took what Arthur Hiller did in one moment and created an orchestra out of that. Yeah. And that would be the rest of his career. I mean, again, even his lesser films, even the crummy ones like Osterman Weekend and Convoy, have moments where he sequences shot, the slow motion, the way he cuts from 2 things happening at the same time, like someone falling in the Wild Bunch, someone gets shot and they fall off the top of across the street. From the bank. They're hiding up on a rooftop. The guy's falling, and it cuts to someone falling off a horse, him falling off that sequence. No one even really rips that off because they don't know how to cover movies. It's so complicated to cover an action scene and cut it so effortlessly. There was an Italian filmmaker who's the Italian filmmaker who rips him off so much? Bruno Mette, but he does it well, and I love watching Bruno. Maybe because Sam Peckinpah didn't make a lot of movies, I like watching the ripoffs. And I guess Tarantino keeps referencing Sam Peckinpah, but hasn't captured that visual the visual oomph he has. Again, it's not just the slow motion shots; it's the way he cuts, the cutting. That's the complicated part. That's so hard to replicate. John Woo does it well. Face Off, Hard Boiled. There's sequences in that movie that remind me of the best stuff of Sam Peckinpah. It's. I find it very moving to watch.
Yeah, the only other person I think who is doing it and doing it properly is maybe Edgar Wright these days. And he started with a Western. Like his first movie was A Fistful of Fingers, which never really got really, was just
That's
more like
right.
a childhood project. But I remember when Scott Pilgrim was shooting here, people were telling stories from the set about how like nobody on set could understand how he was working because he demanded a new setup for every shot, the way a comic book panel, because it's hand drawn, wouldn't quite look the same from shot to shot. So from frame to frame, panel to panel. And so everything had to be slightly different. And then it cuts together and it's virtuosity. It's just beautiful to watch.
I got pretty chummy. I was shot in Toronto. Oh, you're in Toronto.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought I was edit that part. I thought you might have been in the United States.
I'll cut it.
My friend, I got pretty chummy with Brad Allen, who worked on Scott Pilgrim. He did the action direction for Scott Pilgrim. He did Kick-Ass. He directed all the second unit photography on Solo.
Mm-hmm.
And Brad Allen was Jackie Chan's stunt team leader. He was the only Caucasian member of the Jackie Chan stunt team. He's great in a few Jackie Chan movies like Who Am I and Mr. Nice Guy. And when Jackie Chan did Saturday Night Live, he fought Brad Allen in the opening sequence of the show.
Okay.
Brad Allen recently passed. I think he passed last year, shockingly, and there was a little small tribute to him at the Academy Awards. Well, they mentioned his name, but Brad, I love Edgar Wright, and he before that movie he did incredible stuff. And again, when I remember seeing Baby Driver with my kids, my daughter on one side and my son on the, and I kept elbowing him like, look at that shot, look at that shot. And these oneers he did in Baby Driver and these oneers he does in Scott Pilgrim, it's sensational. But because he works with filmmakers like Brad Allen. He gets to work with a guy who was Jackie Chan's right hand man. And this talk about Sam Peckinpah and to compare him to great filmmakers like John Woo, I have to throw into the mix Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung, because Jackie Chan was making Young Master for Golden Harvest. He was directing it. It was his first big studio movie that he was directing. And he realized it was just another Chop Socky movie. And he took 6 months off. He halted production and he watched movies. He watched American musicals and Russian cinema, and he learned cinema. And then when he goes back to the movie, and I swear you can see the birth of modern day action cinema halfway through Young Master. And Sammo Hung too. Sammo Hung said the third arm in the fight, the third fist in the fight is the cameraman. That the cameraman has to learn all the moves that the actors are moving so he can dance between the actors. And when I ever watch Corey Yuen was the cameraman. He's talking the right hand is Corey Yuen. Corey Yuen directed The Transporter Part 1. And that choreography between the actors, and if you watch the camera moving between the actors, it's exhilarating. And it goes to what Sammo Hung taught him as a filmmaker, and what Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung were working in movies together, and they were two great filmmakers working together. And I honestly they must have, when Jackie Chan stopped making the Young Master to go back to make it again and make it a more cinematic movie, one of those movies must have been The Wild Bunch.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my twice-weekly newsletter about physical media, pop culture, and the odd streaming project. This week, as promised, I finally covered Arrow Video's 4K release of The Last Starfighter, and Paramount's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves, and the 4K box set of all the Transformers movies. I know. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Simcast Twitter account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. It's funny. The Blu-ray Millionaires Express just came out a couple of weeks ago, so I just revisited that.
I got it in the mail today.
Yeah,
I got it in the mail today. Yeah,
and it's like a proper Western shot in Alberta somehow. That thinks it's a Western, but isn't really. It incorporates all these other things. And you can just see like the love for the idea of dusty old towns and storefronts. Yeah, absolutely. It's in there.
Yeah, the way Sammo Hung, that fight scene with him and Cynthia Rothrock at the bar, when she's kicking the shit out of him and he turns it around on her. The fight with Richard Norton and the two Japanese samurais who chase him. He's got the flagpole and he's flipping around. The way that's shot, the way it's covered, the way Sammo Hung cuts the action sequences together, it's some of the most exhilarating cinema I've ever seen in an otherwise kind of a silly, dumb Western. It's the quality of filmmaking there is better than anything else that came out that year. Probably, I don't know what year it was, but what won the Academy Award that year pales in comparison in my mind in terms of, again, wielding a movie camera the way Sammo Hung does. And I would love to hear Sammo Hung talk about Sam Peckinpah. To me, it must go back to him because no one stylized action before him. I guess you could say Arthur Hiller at the end of Bonnie and Clyde did it first. Maybe that's the birth of modern day action cinema. But at the same time, that's just a death sequence happening. I don't know if you would call it an action sequence, but maybe it is. But I always think about, Wild Bunch is 1969.
Yep.
That was the same year as Easy Rider, right?
Yeah.
And I always think of Easy Rider and Easy Rider is like Jesus Christ. Now, I'm not trying to be preachy, but if you think of the Bible, there's the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what divides the Old Testament from the New Testament is the birth of Christ. And for me, I always thought of Hollywood cinema. Classic Hollywood cinema is divided by modern day cinema by Easy Rider. Because Easy Rider sort of changed the visual stylistic of movie making, not in a mainstream way. I'm sure there was a lot of experimental cinema made before that, but here was this mainstream movie that came out and looked the way it did. Even Dennis Hopper said it gave birth to music videos, and that year was also Wild Bunch, and just before that was again Bonnie and Clyde. So in and around there is the birth of modern day cinema, and Wild Bunch is certainly a part of it. And it's what's the butterfly effect? Wild Bunch with the butterfly. Sam Peckinpah died in the 80s, but his art is we can still feel it in movies today, like you said, Edgar Wright. I wish Sammo Hung was making more movies. Jackie Chan's still making movies. John Woo is about to release a new action film, which is really thrilling.
Yeah.
I can't put a lot of filmmakers up there. Sam Peckinpah is one of those filmmakers, like the few I mentioned. I feel like I'm in good hands. I love feeling like I'm in good. Everybody halfway through a movie and you're going to love the rest of it because you feel like you're in good. I remember seeing Bronson for the first time. In 3 shots into Bronson, I thought, I'm going to love this movie for the rest of my life. 3 shots in, I was like, oh, what have I found? Police Story had the same when I watched Jackie Chan's Police Story. Like the opening sequence was like, oh my God, where's this film been all my life? And I knew when I got to the end, I'd be just as satisfied. And Sam Peckinpah, I don't know, even like think of those lousy films, like Convoy is regarded as a crummy little movie. I keep bringing them up, but I can watch those any day of the week, any time of day, because he still has that his style is still there, even though, he was probably drinking heavily and up to nonsense, but that also makes a hero out of him. I don't like to promote substance abuse, but he's got some war stories that it's fun to laugh about. Hear people talk. A lot of people, I think, don't have a lot of nice things to say about the man because I think he was hard to work with. But look at Chris Christopherson wrote that loving song about him. And I just think about that limousine that was on the set of right after the Wild Bunch. He made the Ballad of Cable Hogue.
Yep.
And apparently there was a limousine on set and there was a limousine at the airport too. And they were always driving back and forth because he was firing so many people making that movie. But what a terrific film. What a beautiful movie. But again, it doesn't have the oomph. Nothing had the oomph as the Wild Bunch because he had a perfect script. He had a great script. He was able to shoot it the way he wanted. He never had that creative control. He never fulfilled his talents as well again as he did with Wild Bunch.
Yeah, I count myself lucky that I only saw his cut For whatever reason, I just didn't get
Yeah.
to see,
Oh,
probably
right.
because it always looked so terrible.
It did. Yeah, it did on VHS.
Yeah. I mean, above and beyond the pan and scan, it just looked ugly. The color timing was
Yeah.
all messed up, and I never saw a decent print on TV that I could sit through. So I
Yeah.
just kept waiting. I figured I'd see it in a theater, and then it never showed up. And then finally, they released it for Warner's 75th anniversary in his cut, because finally NC-17 was no longer the barrier that it used to be. And
Yeah.
even now, it's still preposterously tame. There's no reason that film should have been rated the way as
Right.
harshly as it
Right.
was.
Right.
But it was the MPAA establishing the R rating for the first time, and it just landed wrong. And so it was hobbled from the get-go. And then you see it, and it's this, like, it is his epic. It's he made longer films, he made more ambitious films, but this is the one that everything clicks on, and never takes a step wrong. And as you were saying about Bonnie and Clyde ushering in a new kind of cinema, this movie is also about killing the old Western.
Yes.
This is what, 6 months after True Grit, which is one of the corniest things. You can say what you want about Wayne's performance, but it looks like it was made for TV.
You just stole the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
It's a television production quality.
Yeah, it just has no ambition.
There's nothing television quality about Wild Bunch. And you make me think of that scene in the movie, because it does feel like it's set at the end of the West. It does feel like sometimes it's the last Western, because they have that scene before the third act starts where they go to town and they see a car for the first time. And they say, "Oh, look at that thing. Look, there's no horses." And the guy's like, "How does it run?" And then, you know what? I saw one of those things up north that was flying in the sky. And they're all bewildered by this new technology coming in. The Ballad of Cable Hogue has the same scene right at the end where they see a car for the first time, and all these cowboys are like, "What the hell is that?" It's like when the internet was introduced. Lee, how do I email? My dad would always ask me. It does. I like that. I like a lot of Westerns that seem to be set right at the end of the Western. Yeah, and you could talk about when I worked at West Coast Video here in Ottawa, and we had it on VHS. I took it home to watch, and I couldn't get through the first 10 minutes of the movie. It looked so bad, and you don't get it when I'm watching it on video. It was a poor transfer. It was pan-scan, and I just thought it was a crummy movie. I didn't really get that the transfer was the reason why I wasn't liking it. And we're so lucky now. I feel like I see all these Blu-rays behind you. We're living in the best era of home video. No one's buying Blu-rays, but the old movies aren't old anymore. They look so good restored. And I had that Leonard Maltin book beside my remote control, and I read some of his reviews of these old movies, and I'm watching a new restoration of an old movie that's probably never been on videotape before. He gives it a crummy review in his book, and I kind of want to tell him, watch it again, watch it now, because it looks so good now. You probably watched a crummy little VHS tape, and you're reviewing the transfer, subconsciously without realizing.
Yeah. Well, you think about the public domain stuff that was everywhere in the 80s, because it was cheap, and you could bring home Citizen Kane, but it looked like it had been dragged through, 6 mud puddles and then stepped on. The Wild Bunch, yeah, I mean, honestly, you would believe the negative had been run over by horses on the day from those old transfers. And then you see it, and I first saw it in a theater at the press screening of the restored cut, and it was just, I just didn't get it until now. I have not encountered this movie properly.
Someone told me once that a lot of the VHS transfer were not from the negative. They never were making transfers from negatives until recently. They were transferring movies from 35 millimeter prints that were coming out of theaters. Mm-hmm. Some of these prints were probably played in the theater for a year. If the projectionist didn't like the way someone's pubic hair looked in a scene, they would cut it out. The manager would tell the projectionist, cut out that scene with that guy's dick, and they'd cut it out, and that's what would go to VHS. They if there was an accidental splice in the film, it would be on VHS for the world to see. And now for the first time on that Millionaires Express Blu-ray that just came out, I never thought that would ever see the light of day, because the Chinese industry doesn't regard classics the way they regard them in North America. A lot of these, a movie would come out, and a week later they would throw out the prints. The fact that they're finding prints and negatives and able to restore these movies, I feel so lucky that I can watch these movies I loved as a kid now looking better. I'm sure Millionaire's Express on your TV and your Blu-ray player looks better than it did at the premiere of the film in Hong Kong back in the day. The colors and the detail, it's so nice. And we're so fortunate to be able to see movies like that now. Whether they're Chinese, like there's some of these movies, these film noir movies that are getting these restorations. They look incredible.
Movies where the cinematography is as much an element of the narrative necessarily as the dialogue or the performances. I mean, you could say that about this film too. And I realize we only have about 4 minutes left. So the thing about the Wild Bunch, I mean, I'm fascinated by how people are going to take this episode because we've barely discussed the film, and yet the vibe of it is coming through so clearly. You had said that the directors who picked up what Peckinpah was putting down and ran with it are making these exhilarating, involved action sequences. The Wild Bunch has this sort of mordant tone where we're allowed to enjoy it, but we also know that there's an expiration date on this sort of stuff. Like these guys are already aging out. They're not aging out of their jobs. The world is moving beyond them. And so the fact that it is this kind of weird elegy for the West and the Western as Peckinpah knew it, I think he's ready to burn it down and start something new. And his subsequent films kind of play that out, because even Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is nothing at all like a Western. It's just it's another period of mourning for these guys.
Yeah. You make me think of the imagery that Peckinpah uses. And I don't think I noticed it before the Wild Bunch, but in the opening sequence, when they rob the bank during the getaway, and when the mayhem hits the streets, he always photographs children observing the violence. The kids are burning, they take a scorpion and they put it down on the anthill. And those kids watch the escape happen and all these people dying. And it's like, what is he saying, on the, those kids now would grow up to see the birth of cinema probably. But he's how it's affecting the future, and he does that through it in a lot of his movies afterwards. You always see children observing the violence, and I guess it goes back to Eisenstein and the Battleship Potemkin. The kids are watching, the kid's stroller goes down the staircase and all that violence is happening around it. When I see it in new movies, when I see kids observing the violence in new movies, I think of Peckinpah. There's Peckinpah again. It's funny when I watch an old movie with William Holden that was released before the Wild Bunch. I'm like, Jesus, he's so old here. I'm surprised he did the Wild Bunch. I mean, the only one who's not old is Warren Oates, and
who's always looked old anyway.
I knew someone who knew Warren Oates, and Warren Oates told him a story about the making of the Wild Bunch. I'd love to tell you about it because it's a really funny to think about when you watch the scene. There's a sequence in the movie that's the poster image. There's a sequence in the third act. There's a gigantic action sequence. And when our four heroes are walking to face off the enemy, there's a long shot with a long lens, and they're just kind of walking towards the camera, walking to their demise. They know if they start this fight, they're going to die. And it's a famous four shot of Ben Johnson, Warren Oates, William Holden, and Ernest Borgnine. And at the time, William Holden was a star. Ernest Borgnine was an Oscar winner. Ben Johnson was in every John Ford film, was synonymous with the genre. But Warren Oates was an unknown actor. And the three of them were teasing him throughout the entire production. And it's a four shot, and it's a really tight shot of them walking. And if you watch the shot, they're always trying to elbow and knock Warren Oates out of the shot. They're trying to push him out. And if you watch Warren Oates' hand, he's slapping. I think it's Ben Johnson. He's like, fuck off. Get away from me. I want to stay in this shot because it's going to make me an action star. I love that I got that story firsthand from someone who knew Warren Oates. So when I was in Mexico City, I was making a film called The Dead Sleep Easy. It was my fourth feature-length film. And in the movie stars Martin Kove, and he plays a filmmaker who's making Wild Bunch Part 2. That's the film within the film. He never gets to finish it. And not a lot of the movie has had to do about the making Wild Bunch 2, but it's always something in the background. And I remember we were shooting the movie, and the star of the movie was this wrestler named Ian Hodgkinson from Kingston, Ontario, who was the biggest name in Mexican wrestling at the time. And Martin Kove took me aside and said, Lee, I don't think Ian has ever seen The Wild Bunch. And I'm like, why? Yeah, he probably hasn't. Why would a Mexican wrestler watch The Wild Bunch? So he's like, well, don't you think he's got to see that movie before we finish this film? So we rented a restaurant. We rented a restaurant downtown Guadalajara, Mexico, and all to ourselves. And we had a screening of The Wild Bunch in this restaurant. And we had cigars. We were barbecuing strawberries and chocolate and fermenting the cigars and the strawberries and chocolate. And I was sitting in the front of the restaurant with Martin Kove, talking about The Wild Bunch and gussing about every shot and every cut. And the wrestler sat behind us, and I knew Martin didn't know. He was on his cell phone the whole time. The star of the movie didn't pay attention to what he was on, but Martin and I had such a good time watching. And Martin Kove's agent also represented Jerry Fielding, who scored the movie. So Martin was the one who told me the story about the Warren Oates story from The Wild Bunch, and he had so much insight about the film. And that hacienda at the end of The Wild Bunch still stands in Mexico. I'd love to get down there and go visit it. Apparently, if you dig deep into the sand, you can find bullet casings left over from when they shot that movie. I don't know if in 2023, but that was a legend back in the day.
Oh man, that's a pilgrimage worth making.
Yes, it's like, I've been to the mall from Dawn of the Dead, and I want to go to the hacienda from The Wild Bunch, and I want to go there and take a hot tub bath with Ben Johnson and a couple of Mexican prostitutes. I don't want to do that. It's a funny sequence in the movie.
I can't go home again. My thanks to Lee Demarbre, whose new film Enter the Drag Dragon is playing in Saskatoon at the Scotiabank Theatre right now through Thursday, June 15th. It opens in Toronto and Cineplex Yonge Dundas June 23rd, and then it'll be rolling throughout other Canadian cities over the summer. Thanks also to Ingrid Hamilton. She knows what she did. You can find Lee on Twitter at DrunkenMaster2, that's the word drunken, the word master, and the numeral 2 with no spaces. And you can find The Wild Bunch on Blu-ray and DVD from Warner Home Entertainment. It's also streaming on the Classics app in the US and Canada, and available to rent or buy on various VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next week.